crossing shortly live to the Opera House, and we're going to be crossing live to the Opera House to hear some organ music. The Opera House has going a new program of an organist in residence. His name's Michael Dudman, and he'll be playing at various times during the coming week, and at times where people perhaps are not accustomed to going to a concert. There'll be lunchtime concerts. You're going to be allowed to go into the concert hall and eat your lunch. Dusk recitals, and gee, I guess they'll be early in this weather. There's all sorts of things that you'll be able to do in relationship to Michael Dudman at the Opera House. And now, live, as we cross to the Opera House, we have at the organ Michael Dudman. And that was Michael Dudman at the Concert Hall Grand Organ, and he is now scampering off his organ seat to another microphone so he can talk to us about the Opera House organ and about some of his work. And I think he should be there just now. Do we have you with us on the other microphone now?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much for that. Could you tell us what it was?
It was a Prelude Fugue in D major by Buxtehude, who's a Danish composer, a predecessor of Bach.
How does the grand organ compare with other organs you've played?
Well, it's a very fine organ. It's the largest mechanical action organ in the world, slightly larger, one stop larger indeed than another very large instrument here in Sydney at Sydney Town Hall, but it's a romantic instrument, and this one is more in the classical tradition.
And we know you're sitting in the Opera House, but whereabouts? Is it right up in a sail somewhere?
The organ console is right next to, at the bottom of the organ pipes on one of the walls. It's about 15 metres, I think, from above the concert hall floor, and it does seem quite a long way down.
I understand it's pretty hard for you to get time to practice because there's so much use going on.
Well, yes, indeed, the auditorium is in fairly constant use for one thing and another, and so it's necessary for to take time when you can get it. Organists are a little unfortunate in this respect, you see. We have to do our preparation on the specific instrument on which we're to play for concerts, whereas a violinist or a flautist carries their practice instrument around with them.
Does that mean you're there at the crack of dawn or in the middle of the night?
Sometimes, yes. I do some rather odd times, 11 o'clock in the evening till 4 in the morning, and not always, but sometimes if that's the only time available.
It must be fairly strange to be in a huge concert hall all on your own at 4 in the morning.
Oh, it's one of the perils of the profession.
What about other cathedrals you've played in? I suppose that the problems are similar there.
Yeah, I was sub-organist of Ely Cathedral in the early 60s, and it was a very, very large and cavernous building, an enormous building, really, and to be in a place like that on your own in the evening makes you look over your shoulder sometimes, sure.
What does an organist in residence do?
Well, the main idea behind this residency is to try and make organ music accessible to as wide an audience as possible. Organ music and the organ concert repertoire is perhaps a little off the beaten track so far as most concert goers are concerned, and my own feeling about this is that in organ programs we should try and include some music which is reasonably accessible and not just of interest to organists and organ teachers.
What sort of accessible music will you be playing in Sydney?
Well, there's a great deal of music written by composers, French composers perhaps especially, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, which is tuneful and which makes very exciting use of the resources of the organ, and composers like César Franck and Liszt and Guilmont, Dubois, Gigoux, people of that kind, and certainly most of my programs will contain pieces by those composers. Nearly all of them will also contain music by Bach and Handel and other perhaps greater composers also.
Is there very much exciting new music being written for the organ?
Yes, indeed. The organ which reached its zenith as far as the literature written for it was concerned with Bach, and indeed in the 18th century generally, tended to decline in importance during the classical period and the Romantic period. Then in the late 19th century there was a revival of interest. Fine composers like Liszt and César Franck and Mendelssohn wrote fine music for the organ, and in the 20th century particularly a whole host of interesting and worthwhile composers have written very worthwhile organ music. One thinks particularly of the great French composer Olivier Messiaen, who began his career as a composer for the organ.
We're used to, I suppose, to some extent, seeing mechanical or electronic organs being taken over by the pop industry. But has there been any interest in the pop industry for the sort of organ work and the sort of organs you deal with?
I don't think so. The history of the electronic organ now goes back quite a fair way, more than 50 years, but I think they have to be viewed as an instrument in their own right, as a separate machine, rather than as an imitator of the pipe organ, because in that respect they're really rather unsuccessful.
I know you've agreed to play for us a little more, and particularly something you will be playing at the concerts this evening, so I wonder if I can ask you to do that, but give you time to actually get back to your perch.
Okay. Well, I'd like to play two little pieces, each of them quite short. The first, by Haydn, was written originally for a musical clock, a clock with a barrel organ mechanism. And then after that, I'll play the very well-known Trumpet Voluntary by Jeremiah Clarke. And as you've mentioned, both of these will be on the program today at 1:10 at the free lunchtime recital.
We'll hear that in just a moment. And by the way, you can take your lunch and eat it, I understand, in the concert hall. I think he's there. I think it's coming. I'm sure it will. That was marvellous, wasn't it? And if you'd like to hear more of that, off to the Opera House, the perfect thing to do on a cold and miserable day. You can attend a lunchtime concert at 1:30 today, taking your lunch with you. There are lunchtime concerts throughout the next couple of weeks. There's a Sunday afternoon recital and dusk recitals on weeknights. If you'd like more information, 20588. That's the Opera House number, 20588. On City Extra, it's 9 minutes to 11.